Over the last 5 weeks, Bitcoin price is down from an all-time high of $126,000 down to $94,000 right now. And that's about a 25% fall. And whenever Bitcoin dips like that, I'm reminded of the Coldplay song, The Scientist, where they say, nobody ever said it was easy. No one ever said it would be this hard. And it is hard to ride out those dips, especially when we hit an all-time high like that 126. A lot of us, including myself, thought it was going to keep going. It'd be $150,000 or $200,000 by the end of the year. Well, Bitcoin has a way of humbling us all. But what I've learned over the years is you got to ride out these dips. I am not afraid. And that's really because of 2 reasons. The first is this 25% dip is not my first rodeo. I've been in this 8 years and I've seen much worse. But second is I have strong conviction in the long-term direction of where Bitcoin is going. So I'm Michael. This is Betirement. Stick around and I'll explain more. So as I said, a 25% dip in the price of Bitcoin really hurts, especially coming down from an all-time high like we had at $126,000 in October. My net worth has taken a big hit, but I've been in this long enough and I've seen this many times before. And even before I was in it, other people had made the same observation. 10 years ago, back in 2015, there was a guy named Alex that posted a video on YouTube, and it was entitled, "Don't Buy Bitcoin Because You Know It's Going to Crash." And it was kind of an ironic title. But in the video, he was showing the Bitcoin chart way back to 2011 and the various quote-unquote crashes that he rode through as a Bitcoin holder. He shared how he rode it down from 36 cents per Bitcoin all the way down to 21 cents per Bitcoin. And then another time, he rode it all the way down from $29 per Bitcoin down to $3. And then another time, he rode it from $213 to $70. And in his final example, he rode it down from $1,100 back down to $239. The moral of the story is, in the time that he had been holding it, it had risen from 36 cents down to 21 cents and then all the way up to $1,100. And then, of course, as I'm sharing now, in October, a month ago, we were at $126 per Bitcoin. I did a follow-up video a few weeks ago, kind of echoing Alex's video and sharing these dips that we've seen even since 2023. And we've seen 3 or 4 of these 25 to 30% dips in that time frame. And yet, the moral of the story, as Alex has learned and as I've learned, is that you just need to hold and ride through these dips. I started buying Bitcoin in 2017, and at the time, Bitcoin's price was $18,000, and it had risen up through that year from just a few $1,000s per coin. Now, when I started buying it, it was kind of right around the top. It topped out slightly under $20,000 that year, and I rode it all the way down to $3,000 in 2018. And then from there, it slowly started to grind up and hit $69,000 in 2021. And I remember thinking myself that it was going to be $250 that year, or at least $100,000. And many people thought $100,000 back in 2021 was certainly going to happen. Well, once again, Bitcoin humbled us all, and that $69,000 was the peak. And we rode it all the way back down to $16,000 in 2022. But it's back up, right? And right now, even though we feel like we're riding through a dip, it's still $94,000. That's a far away from that low just a few years ago at $16,000. So these dips aren't easy. It takes conviction, and you really need to either be blind and not checking the price, or just have conviction in where you know it's going to go long term. Back in that time frame of 2022, Jack Dorsey, who's the founder of Twitter and also the company Square, who's now big into Bitcoin, he said, "I don't watch the price. I know it will always gain in value over the long term as more people are able to use it." So as I've shared, it's not my first rodeo, and this dip is not so surprising to me. A 25% dip after a large run up to 126,000 is not too surprising. But the other thing is I have strong conviction in where Bitcoin is going and the adoption we're seeing. And really, if you pay attention to the news and what's happening, this is becoming more and more clear. So just a few examples. Recently, Luxembourg, who's part of the European Union, started to allocate part of their sovereign wealth fund to Bitcoin. Now, they're starting small, but over time, I'm sure this will grow. Another respected institution recently made an announcement. Harvard University last year had started to buy IBIT, which is BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF, as part of their endowment. And just recently, it was revealed that Harvard has increased this exposure to the IBIT ETF, and that exposure is now over $443 million, almost $500 million, and that is their largest public investment for that massive endowment. So obviously another good sign that Bitcoin adoption and its value as a strong store of value is really becoming more and more recognized. Another example of recent news related to Bitcoin adoption is Citibank. One of the US's largest banks recently announced that in 2026, they will begin offering Bitcoin custody services. Another example of recent adoption, just this week, Square, who's the payments company that was founded by Jack Dorsey, turned on the ability for their merchants, which total 4 million merchants across the United States, the ability to receive payments for their goods and services in Bitcoin. So those are some examples of major institutions that have begun adopting Bitcoin as part of their business models. But there's also some major economic tailwinds that I believe are working in Bitcoin's favor over the next 6 to 12 months. Just a few examples is that the government's going to be ending the qualitative tightening, or QT, regime that's been in place for a couple years, which means they will begin qualitative easing, QE. And that's basically introducing additional money supply into the system. This goes kind of hand in hand with the interest rates cuts that are expected from the Fed over the next 6 or so months. There's also talks that the government will be issuing stimulus checks out to the citizens. And of course, that's just more money entering the system. So the more money or money supply that's floating around the economy finds its way into assets like Bitcoin. So I believe in that medium term of 6 to 12 months, there's some tailwinds that'll help the Bitcoin price. And of course, the government just opened after a 40-day shutdown, and the Treasury General Account, or TGA, is fully filled up, which means they're ready to spend money. So again, more money that's about to enter the economy, and a lot of that will go into assets like stocks and like Bitcoin. So everybody needs to make their own decisions about Bitcoin, and you really need to study a lot in order to gain the conviction or the level of conviction I have. It doesn't come easy. You can't borrow somebody else's conviction. You really need to study and understand it for yourself. I recently received a comment on one of my videos, and the person had a very negative impression about Bitcoin. He said, Bitcoin in any form and in any amount is not an investment, and it has no intrinsic value. This dude is a Bitcoin bro. If he is smart, he is either already cashed out or knows enough to do it now. And when I see something like that, I can't help but think this person just hasn't studied. Now, if somebody has studied and they have an opinion like that, I'm totally fine with that. It's not for everybody, and people have different perspectives or different priorities in life and in their investments, and I really don't have an issue with that. But a quote like that reminds me of something that Michael Saylor recently said. He said, I don't think there's a single person with a negative opinion that spent 100 hours studying Bitcoin. And I really think that's the truth. I think a lot of people with those negative impressions either didn't study it and haven't really taken the time to study and understand it, or maybe they made some unwise choices. You know, maybe they bought early and got scared out of it when it dipped 25%, and now have regrets that they could have had multiple Bitcoins from back in the day, and they're just bitter because they didn't handle it properly. So like I said, it's everybody's choice to study, understand, and then decide. Do you want to invest in Bitcoin? Do you want to put any money into Bitcoin? To me, it's not an investment. It's more like savings, because I think it's the best form of money that exists. But that conviction comes from many, many hours, many books that I've read, many podcasts and just kind of deep study. And, you know, the message of this video is don't get scared out of it. Don't get shaken out by a 25% drawdown. I'm sure there's people that bought at the top at 126,000 because they heard somebody say it's going straight to 200 and, you know, it's a sure thing. You know, in the long term, I'm confident it's about as close to a sure thing that exists. There are some risks that we need to watch out for. Just like Alex back in 2011 when he was buying Bitcoin for 21 cents, or my first purchase at $18,000, or back when it was down at $3,000 or $4,000 when I was buying. You know, it's a wild ride, but if you had that conviction and don't get scared out, it can do very well for you. And it's been a big part of why I was able to retire this year at the age of 51. So back to the Coldplay song that I opened up with. I was reminded of that same song by Jack Mallers. Jack is a Bitcoiner and the founder of two Bitcoin companies. The one is Strike, which is the exchange where I buy my Bitcoin. And the other company is 21. That's a new company that he's starting up with some partners. But he recently said on his podcast, I never said it would be easy. I said it would be worth it. And that pretty much sums up my message for you in this video. Buying Bitcoin and holding Bitcoin and riding out these dips is not easy, but for me, it's definitely been worth it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe. The majority of people that watch my videos haven't yet subscribed. So if you watched a few of them and you like them, please hit subscribe. I'm excited to be approaching 5,000 subscribers after just starting this channel back in September. So it's been a great ride, and hope you enjoyed it. You might want to check out these videos.